We have to get to a place as a people where we demand quality health care.
Yes.
If your doctor is not offering you an HIV test, you're not getting good quality health care.
Hello, everyone in the DMV and beyond. Welcome to another episode of Positive Voices. And listen, today we have a special guest all the way from the White House. So you're going to see me hitting my notes because I want to make sure we ask them every single question that you would have out there in the audience and in the community. So our guest today is Harold Phillips. But before we introduce him, I'm your host, Malachi Stewart.
Hi, I'm T. Pearson Hall.
And Harold, thank you for being here, first of all.
Yes,
we really
thank you.
appreciate a person of your stature. We've had celebrities here. We've done the grassroots community thing. But it's good to have someone to kind of talk about what goes on behind the scene, what goes on with policy.
Yes.
So introduce yourself and let people know what it is you do at the White House.
Sure. Thanks for having me and giving me this opportunity to talk to your viewers and listeners. I am Harold Phillips. I am the director for the White House Office of National AIDS Policy here in Washington, D.C.
So what do you do in your capacity?
So in my capacity, and I think it's an important role that is part of the Domestic Policy Council here in the White House. The Domestic Policy Council covers every aspect of American life, and that's something I don't think I really realized or appreciated before I started working in the White House. The role of the director of the Office of National AIDS Policy is to help set our strategy for ending the HIV epidemic and then coordinate across the federal programs and the policies, working with our Office of Management and Budget to figure out, are we getting enough money for HIV work, working with members of Congress and their staff to get them to understand the importance of HIV as a priority, the populations that are impacted, and then also working with the community to make sure that our federal response is aligned with what the community actually needs. And then last, but also important, is also making sure that other aspects of American society, so our churches, our academic institutions, our private sector and business partners are all responding to help us end the HIV epidemic.
Wow, so it sounds like the ending of HIV is not just a dream. It is something that is tangible, right?
It is something that is very tangible. We have all the tools to end the HIV epidemic, which is incredible to think about in our lifetime. So when you think about HIV prevention and access to PrEP, when you think about the fact that somebody on HIV treatment who is living with HIV, who becomes virally suppressed, can't pass HIV on to their sexual partners.
Right.
So right there, we've got all the tools we need, but it's an issue of access and also information so that the communities that need this information the most get it and then have access to medical care.
As a person working in the field, I've seen people define ending the epidemic in a lot of different ways. So for our listeners, for our viewers who may not work in HIV, when you say that it's possible for the epidemic to end, what would that look like?
So that would look like a couple of things. One, people who are living with HIV have access to the medical care and medications that they need to have a long, healthy life. Our medications are so effective right now that a person who is diagnosed with HIV today, who gets into medical care and takes their medication appropriately and consistently, can live to be 80, 90 years of age. So ending the HIV epidemic includes those folks who are living with HIV, allowing them to have a long, healthy life, but also preventing new HIV transmissions.
Gotcha.
So access to PrEP, access to clean needles for those who are injecting. So we have these tools. Making sure those are available to the communities is also part of ending the HIV epidemic. So we bring down our rate of new infections to about 3,000 or less in the United States on an annual basis. Right now, we're about at 26,000.
Okay.
So we've got some work to do,
For sure.
but it's possible.
So the work that you do at the White House, does it have a personal touch for you?
It
If
does.
so, could you share?
Absolutely. So I am not the first, but I am a director of the Office of National AIDS Policy and a Black gay man living with HIV.
Oh, okay.
I've been living with HIV since August of 2005, so almost 18 years. And so for me, and also in addition, the loss that I've experienced. I think I initially got into doing HIV work because I had lost friends to HIV, and I saw what they went through. And those challenges. And when I started working in the federal government, I started thinking about how do I make these systems work differently? so that people don't have to deal with the stigma, the discrimination, the lack of information, the lack of access to care. So it became personal for me in terms of my initial involvement. And then there was a point where I was like, now this is about me.
Yeah.
And so bringing that perspective to the job has also been something I've been able to do as well.
Good stuff.
Do you find, and this is me asking you this personally, but do you find that people are often surprised to know that there is a Black gay man living with HIV in such a prominent position in the White House? Is that usually the reaction you get?
Yes.
It was my reaction.
And I'm not the first. I'm not the first.
Right,
Douglas
right.
Brooks was
Yeah,
the
yeah,
first one before me in the Obama administration. Yeah, it is often surprising. But I think it's really important to have people with lived experiences
Yes.
in those policy positions.
Absolutely.
And I said this to someone else, I said it recently, that sometimes me just showing up at work is an act of defiance because I'm not supposed to be there. One of my first meetings in the White House was they were hosting a meeting of transgender women of color. They were meeting with our then director of domestic policy, Susan Rice. She was the director until May of this year. And so Susan was having this meeting of transgender women of color. It was my first week on the job. And I had sort of written and said, do you think it would be important to have the director of the Office of National AIDS Policy at this meeting? Because these are my people.
Right.
And so they were like, oh, yes, absolutely, please, come to the meeting. So I show up at the meeting. And so we're all around the table. Many of the transgender women I had known from previous work and meetings in the community and conferences. And we're all talking about their issues of access to housing, employment, HIV, STIs, and there we are. And I left the meeting, and I walked out and I looked over at the White House, and it was the first time that the gravity of it all sort of hit me. And the fact that we were having this meeting, this real meeting with real talk in the White House, in a place that was built by slaves, and here I was, Black gay man.
Come on now.
Having this conversation, and then there were community members that were having the conversation and telling the administration what they needed from them. It was real, and it was like, yeah, this is
That
where
would
I'm
feel like
supposed
a
to be.
moment.
It was,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
a moment.
So when we talk about different groups at the table, right, that is helping in the epidemic, who else do you think needs to be at this table to kind of help push the EHE mission?
It's going to take I always say it takes a whole of society effort. And by that, I mean our schools, our academic institutions, our faith-based organizations. Many times the church has done so much harm to our community. And when I talk to them, I try to get them to realize, just don't do any harm.
Yes.
It's important that, you know, as those institutions that many of us go to, grew up in, that we have leaders in those institutions who are able to talk about well-being and wholeness and quality of life. You don't have to talk to me about, you know, accepting me. Talk about how I can get access to care. Talk about how I can take care of myself and my family. Give us the information to be able to be well.
Yes.
That should be part of the spiritual mission.
Yes.
So those institutions need to be there. Our schools, many of our schools are not doing sexual health education. And so young folks are coming up and out and they don't have the understanding about PrEP or PEP or DoxyPEP, all these things that are, you know, what gonorrhea, what does it look like?
Yeah, I was
What
gonna
does
say
it feel
sometimes
like?
they don't even know what the
They don't even
STIs
know what that
are.
is.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know?
But I don't even think sexual education talks about STIs anymore. I think they pulled that a long time ago.
No.
It does when
Right.
we do it.
Oh, well.
When you all do it,
Not
which
by
is
your
good.
teacher at
Yeah.
school.
Right.
But that's the conversation,
Yeah.
right? A lot of
That's the
times,
conversation.
as a person who
Right.
works at the health department, schools are asking us to come.
Yeah.
So even when I was a disease investigator, we were being pulled off duty, and my favorite thing to do was to go to these schools, but it was because a lot of the schools were recognizing that they either didn't have the capacity to have the conversation as far as like knowledge and ability to communicate
Right.
it, or they really just like didn't know enough themselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that really does speak to the point. Can I ask you, we talked a little bit about like EHE's mission, but can you define what it is?
Sure. EHE is sort of shorthand because we love our acronyms here. in
Uh-huh.
We
Washington,
do.
We
DC.
do.
Ending the HIV epidemic.
Okay.
It is an initiative that targets And by targets, I mean there are 57 areas of the United States that contribute to more than 50% of the new HIV diagnosis. Washington, D.C. is one of those places. Within those 57 places, there are 7 rural states that are also part of that makeup. But what we have done is added additional money and additional focus to those 57 areas of the country. If we can reduce new infections in those 57 areas, will bring our HIV rates down in the United States. So the EHE initiative puts additional money into those areas of the country. Again, DC is one of them, and really sort of, I think, focuses not only the new federal resources, so additional federal money, but also galvanizing the community and also the federal agencies that are doing this work to really and truly get on board and really make it happen. So it's been in existence since 2019. The Biden administration has incorporated it into our national HIV/AIDS strategy. It's a key component of the work that we're doing to end the HIV across the country.
So when we talk about the movement, right, if you will, how does that move? Is that moved with funding? Is it moved by like the general small people kind of putting money into their communities? Like, how can we keep EHE moving, right, long term?
Right. I think, that's a really great question. Like I said, it started in 2019, but then we had COVID, which was the biggest public health crisis, in our lifespan, since most of us weren't here for the Spanish flu in 1918. But COVID really got in the way of our HIV work.
Okay, for sure.
Our public health departments, people were like scrambling, even sending people home. So, where do you even go to get an HIV test? So the movement really is getting back on board since COVID and turning that corner. Now, there's opportunities for people to be involved at the community level.
Okay.
There are at the planning body level as well, because we have our HIV Planning Council here in DC, which people are invited to be a part of and to engage and help make decisions about programs, services, and funding for your area. I think our private sector businesses also should be involved. Business community can move faster than government.
That's true.
We saw that in COVID, and we learned it. And so having them as a partner in HIV has been one of the things that I've been able to, accomplish and put some energy behind to get private sector partners more involved and engaged. I would say also there's an opportunity for not just those working in healthcare, because HIV is an issue that impacts housing, transportation, employment. So job training centers can be involved in this work as well. If you're training homeless youth to help them get jobs, they don't have to do sex work, which will put them at risk for HIV.
There you go.
So there's an opportunity on all levels to be involved in the initiative to end the HIV epidemic.
Thank you for that.
And where do you kind of see that going? Like, what should the community know about what, like, some of the future goals are for EHE work? Because you mentioned some things that we know in the field is like a problem, like youth homelessness. Where do you see the trajectory?
So one thing I think in terms of the overall trajectory, we need to have conversations about HIV. There are so many people who think HIV is over, HIV is only a gay thing.
That's why we're here.
Which is why we're here.
Right.
This conversation that we're having, folks need to be having that conversation. Black women.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which, one of the things that we've done in the White House is release a national HIV/AIDS strategy, which outlines the priority populations. By that, I mean the people who are most impacted by HIV. And of course, it is gay men, especially gay and queer men of color, transgender women. Black women are specifically called out, and youth. Now, in most spaces, when I'm talking to women, they don't realize like black women are a priority population.
Right.
I didn't know that. Or if you ask black women about when's the last time you were offered an HIV test? Or did you know that PrEP is available for you? Or black women will say, oh, I saw those commercials. I didn't think it was about me. Or I didn't see myself in those commercials. So we have some a lot of work to do in having these conversations in places and spaces where it might be uncomfortable, but the conversation needs to be had because our community is being impacted by it.
I have a question for you. So as we talk about like diagnosis and just testing, right? And when you mentioned about Black women, I'm like, I'm sitting there thinking, when was the last time I was offered an HIV test? I couldn't tell you. And I've been to several doctors, several specialists. They've all ordered blood work for different things. But it's not until I say, to my OB, right? And say, when you're doing your screen testing, can you test me for HIV too? And then it's part of the conversation. But as a Black woman that has to sit in those spaces, it's kind of uncomfortable to be the first one to negotiate or to ask for HIV tests, right? Can you test me for HIV? Because now I got to sit with this stigma of like you looking at me like, so what you got going on? Right. And so do you think that if we can get the HIV testing as part of the STI testing, kind of like an automatic run through versus someone having to ask for it, do you think that would help like push the agenda a little more?
Absolutely. I think, a couple of things in what you just said. One, trying to make HIV testing more routine. Just like they're coming in there getting your blood for your cholesterol and all the rest of it. They check your blood pressure. They need to be checking for HIV. So we've tried to do some additional work to train healthcare providers to make this just part of routine medical care. Take the stigma out of it. One of the things that I'm also really excited about is some of the new technology coming along. AI, artificial intelligence, just automatically sort of putting that out there. Are you having sex? Yes. Would you like an HIV test? The computer, no stigma, no judgment.
She don't know. She don't know your identifier.
The community, right? You don't know, and I'm not telling you how I'm having sex. You just answer the question, are you having sex? Right. So there are new technologies that are being embedded in our HIV work that will make some of this easier. But I also want to say that, we have to get to a place as a people where we demand quality health care.
Yes.
If your doctor is not offering you an HIV test, you're not getting good quality health care.
There you go.
And I want to challenge everyone out here, if you haven't had an HIV test, ask for one at your next medical appointment. Or go to our public health department and get a test. Or go to one of our community-based agencies and get a test. It's the gateway and important for you to know so that you can get linked to either prevention or care and treatment. In my government work, I once asked several of my Black female coworkers, I said, at your next medical appointment, ask for an HIV test. And they came back and they were like, wow. Wow, I couldn't believe some of the responses I got. One friend said, her doctor said, well, aren't you an old married woman? What do you need with an HIV test?
That's crazy to me.
It follows.
Right?
It
We're
does.
telling them to go get
somebody
tested.
who works in the HIV/AIDS Bureau for the federal government. You know what they do, and that's what
it's
you're
very
gonna say as a
assumptive
doctor.
responses from doctors.
Yeah.
Another one, my single Black female friend, her doctor said, "Oh, I didn't think you were out there like that." These are doctors who know what these women do.
Yes.
And so we used it as a teachable moment. I said, now, if this is happening to you all with good government health insurance, private doctors, what's happening out there in the community? So we've got a lot of education to do with our healthcare workforce to take the stigma, the discrimination, and the judgment out of HIV testing.
For sure. And I can't even say I'm surprised because I go to a medical office and I had a provider who knows what I do, who knows where I work, and who knows that I've been living with HIV since 2008 and I'm undetectable, and who told me that I shouldn't get a tattoo. I was going to get, I just got this tattoo on my hand, and she was like, oh, why would you get that tattoo and you know you're living with HIV?
Wow.
And I changed providers because I didn't want to have to, I didn't want to have that. Because I can't even have the patience for that conversation. But that leads me into, we kind of talked about, and you hinted on like what it means to be at the table. You were at the table. You were representing and intersectional, identifiers. I recently had like the privilege of moderating a conversation between Prince George's and DC's LGBT affair offices, and both just talking to the community. And so one of the things that came up from the audience, from that sort of town hall, was that they don't feel like they're represented at the table. And so I was like, well, who? Like, let's name it. We have everybody here in the room, you know, who are the people? And so some of the things we were hearing was that they felt like enough black MSM were not represented at the table, that Latino MSM weren't represented at the table, that lesbian women weren't represented at the table, and that the resulting factor, or obvious ways we see that demonstrated, was in like how Capital Pride is a celebration of queerness, and Black Pride feels more like a celebration of, or a time to reach out for sexual health. And, you know, Latino Pride feels like, they use the term like kind of like stitch me down and taped up. What can you speak to about any of that? I'm giving you all of that broadly, but what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, you know, I think I've seen. So I've lived in Washington D.C. since 1988. 88. I'll say it. And watching, you know, our queer community grow and become more inclusive and more spaces. You know, has been something that is more amazing to me. I think there's, you know, going to both, because I go to Black Gay Pride and then I go to, you know, the General Pride Festival as well. For me, they serve different purposes. There is something that is just, I don't know, absolutely beautiful and enriching about Black joy. And I get that from Black Pride. You know, I get to see all of the diversity of our community, and there are times where I just sit in the lobby and I'm like, look at us go. Look at
us,
this.
Black, gay, and happy.
Right. And you know, and as an older Black gay man, I'm like, yeah, this is the stuff that I fought for. This is the stuff I marched for. I had the black boots and, you know, out there demanding our rights. And I'm like, and look at how it's unfolded.
You was on the front line.
And I was out there.
He said the black boots. You heard him.
Black combat boots.
The Nike boots.
And the shorts. You know, and the freedom rings, you know. But so seeing how it has evolved and become more inclusive. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not more work to be done, because there are more and different voices that still need to be at the table, to be engaged, and we need to continue to create additional spaces and places where that can flourish.
With DC being so high on the list, right, for the Black women, Black men, the White House is right here, though. So what do you think could be shifted for us to change the numbers right here in the nation's capital, where all of the policy and stuff is being created? Yeah,
you know, I think DC is on the right path.
Okay.
We have seen some successful interventions be implemented in DC that are making a difference. So our rates are decreasing, both among our youth population. I think our MSM rate, I think it may be stabilized. Don't quote me. I'm still trying to figure that out. But things are moving in the right direction for DC overall. DC as a jurisdiction, I think, has not been afraid to be innovative when it comes to both syringe exchange programs, overdose prevention, thinking about how do these all intersect. The things that worry me about DC are our STI rates.
Right.
So I know our health department has implemented DoxyPep and is getting more information out there about medication that you can take to prevent sexually transmitted infections. I think that's great. I think that's going to be helpful. And I think also having that conversation will help connect people to both HIV prevention, HIV testing, and also treatment. I get worried sometimes about the district also. There are economic circumstances that also put people at risk. You know, when you're like sleeping on friends or relatives' sofa and all the rest of it, and worried about stable housing or where you're going to get your next meal, you might engage in activities that put you at risk for HIV.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Or if you're living with HIV and worried about the roof over your head, then you're less worried about taking your medication or making a doctor's appointment. And so how we meet the immediate needs of district residents, especially with the basics of affordable housing, income, jobs, food security, those are some of the things and the pressures that I think
Yeah.
are on us right now. But I think overall, DC has some programs in place that are moving things in the right direction. I just want our economy to play along with us and help people with overall quality of life.
And you kind of answered this, but I want to ask more directly because when we look at the demographics of people most at risk, Black MSM who are young, and Black women, and we look at like the mapping, right, of where we see new infections and how infection rates are like, I guess in the contact tracing mapping, like you kind of see like the same viral kind of connectivity in like Ward 7, Ward 8, I believe Ward 6, don't quote me. But we're noticing that there does seem to be a socioeconomic piece that is involved. And these tend to be, if by proxy, if I'm born Black and poor in DC, if I'm Black and poor and I'm a transplant in DC and I'm therefore living in these wards, I can do literally the same thing as everyone else, but just by proxy of where I live, I'm at greater risk. Do you feel like, to some degree, at least here, like socioeconomic stature and like race have a play?
Oh, absolutely.
And what do we do about that?
And what do we do about that? Absolutely. I think it does play a role and a factor. And I think some of the things that we're trying to do both include sort of increasing access to HIV prevention, increasing access to the information, because many in those wards do or don't have the access to the information, as well as access to the care and prevention options that are there too. But then also, like you mentioned, being able to think about it holistically as a package. So the social economic piece, healthcare, and what we call sort of the social drivers of health. So my housing status, whether or not I have a job, whether or not I have a job that includes insurance, are all things that play a role in my own individual health outcomes.
That's true.
And so what we've been trying to do is think about how do we create medical homes or entryways into both medical care that also have connection to social services and economic services as well. And especially, for our at-risk groups like our young people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what can the youth do? Speaking of young people, what can the youth do? I love working with youth and I'm with them a lot, right? And most of them want to get involved, but I can tell you that they're not necessarily having conversations about HIV. That is something that is so far removed from their brains. It's rather, I don't want to get pregnant before I don't want to contract HIV. So what can the youth do to kind of help shift the conversation? Well, rephrase. What can myself and other youth workers do that work with youth to kind of help get the conversation going so that they can see themselves at the table?
Sure. So one of the organizations that I've done some work with in the past is Advocates for Youth. And Advocates for Youth has toolkits to allow youth to learn and understand how to talk about these issues as HIV, STIs, pregnancy prevention, as well as how to also advocate. How do you talk to lawmakers about these things? That's a space and a place. I think, when I have the opportunity to meet and talk with young people who are able to give that real perspective of here's what's happening in my community or here's what's happening in my school. It really and truly makes a difference to me as an older person trying to figure out policy or with the understanding of this is how I can move the policy and funding levers in a different way to address what I'm hearing real time from this youth. So I encourage youth to not only be involved in sort of having these conversations, but program and service delivery, but also meeting with lawmakers and influencing policy and advocacy and having those conversations. hearing, for example, from some of the youth about some of the LGBTQ laws that are happening in other states
Right.
and their impact on them and their families, it has motivated individuals in the White House to really think about what can we do both in partnership with Department of Justice or the White House and the president's executive powers to really help address some of these issues
Yeah.
of discrimination that are happening. But it's different. It lands different when it's a young person giving that message to us
Absolutely.
at the White House.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Speaking of policy, one of the things that kind of, I believe it was last year, there was a Texas ruling that that set the precedence that sort of it allowed for PrEP not to be, it didn't force employers to pay for PrEP if it was sort of a conflict with their religious beliefs. And that was, for some people, it seemed probably like an isolated incident or like, okay, that's happening. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? For myself and other people who work in this field, we got a little shook because we didn't know, okay, is this, how isolated is it? What are the connotations? What precedence is that setting for the future of HIV? We were shook.
Yep.
And so what can you speak to? What does that look like? Should we be afraid?
So, yeah, let me say a couple of things about this, because you're talking about the Braidwood case, which is a case that has put at risk all of the preventative services that are part of the ACA. So not just HIV prevention. We're talking about things like cancer screenings.
Right.
And so it is, so let's be clear. It is, and we have said this, and our White House press secretary has said this as well, that this is another attack on trying to weaken the Affordable Care Act and access to preventive services for all Americans. PrEP is a part of that. Our HIV prevention work is wrapped up in this as well. Our Department of Justice and several others are working through the court system to see if what we can do to strike this ruling down. It may eventually have to go to the Supreme Court. But we stand behind, we as the White House and the Biden-Harris administration stand behind our efforts to provide access to preventative services and screenings across the board for all Americans, and standing behind and standing with the Affordable Care Act. Giving businesses the opportunity to sort of opt out of preventive services. There are many businesses that have stepped forward and said, you know what? There's an economic and business case for why I should be providing access to preventive services. So think about it. Your health care becomes more expensive when we're treating, say, stage 4 cancer that we could have caught earlier.
Right.
So businesses are going, this does not make a good business decision either, court.
Right.
We need the ability to provide access to preventive services for our employees.
Yes.
Why would we not? So many of them are coming forward and also filing briefs with the court saying, hold it. So that's kind of where we are. Should we be shook? Absolutely. Because there continue to be attacks on our overall health care. And the people that are going to be most impacted by this are Black and brown individuals, are women. So think about it. Giving employers an option not to screen women for cervical cancer, as an example.
Right.
Who is that going to impact? Right. So again, that's another one of those attacks. But we're watching it, and the administration is doing what it can, and we're also working with the Department of Justice is the bottom line.
So we right to be shook, but you got our back.
We're trying.
Yeah, okay.
He said he got us. So you started the conversation with you having a positive status, right? And so I can just imagine every day is a journey of you, like you said, a remembrance of when you was out in the streets with your pen on and your Nike boots, right? And here we are at the White House. So what does it feel like for you every day to wake up knowing that you are still impacting so much policy that is making the new generation of us gay folks, right, to come up behind you and hopefully have a better pathway?
I think, there are those days in the White House where it's easy to forget or get bogged down in the everyday or just, for lack of a better word, just the grind of the White
Yeah.
House. I think when I sort of realized, like, oh, I am making a difference, is usually when I'm out in the community.
Okay.
And I will see or hear or learn the stories of people. People send letters to the president. And there is an official Office of White House Correspondence. And one of the, and every now and then, they will send bundle the letters up, some of them, and send them to White House staff, because they know somebody figured we are in the grind. And sometimes I take a look at them, sometimes I don't. I took a look at one, because Spirit moved me, like, read these. And it was from a guy in Kentucky who had been living with HIV, who had found out he was positive 5 years ago. And he heard about everything that the administration was doing to help people with HIV. And he had, as a result of his status, he had come out to his family, and he had fallen in love, had a partner who was negative and on PrEP. And he wanted to thank the president for what he had done.
Wow.
And so that letter was in the bundle, and I read it, and I was like, okay, yep, I'm glad he thanked the president, because the president has been in line with everything that we wanted to do as an administration. But it was like, that was me and my work.
Yeah. Hello.
And so if those reminders that we get from the community, that's
Yeah.
what sort of keeps me going, knowing that, I can have an impact, I am making a difference, and that we are, helping people.
Well, we thank you. We thank you and your staff and the whole administration for just everything that you guys are doing every day. Yes,
For
thank
sure.
you.
And before we wrap up, we met at a gala. We were both award recipients. I didn't know who you was when I ran into you. So we had the opportunity to talk as people, as two Black gay men who were just kikiing, who were from two different generations. And it was such a beautiful moment. And then I remember thinking, when you went on stage, that they sort of did what we did and started this interview, and we just kind of went into who you are and your official title and getting all these government questions. And I feel like I never really see you on platforms get to talk about what it was like just for Harold, the person who was diagnosed with HIV and who had to probably navigate some of the things that we all living with HIV had to navigate. So no pressure, but whatever you want to speak to, whatever that human experience was. Because I felt like when I met you, I knew why you were in the room. Before I knew what your title was, we were talking about experiences where I knew, okay, I know why this person's sharing a stage with me. So
So I would say, when I got diagnosed in 2005, it was hard. It was not easy, and I was, to be quite frank about it, I was angry.
Yeah.
Because this was not part of the plan.
right.
I was one of those people that I had a plan. My life had a trajectory. I was supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z, and I had been doing X, Y, and Z. So I was mad. I was angry. I knew enough to know that my life was not over.
Yeah.
Because I worked in the field, so I knew. I mean, when the doctor came in and said, we've run every test to try to figure out why you are sick, why you were in the hospital, and you got an HIV, you're HIV positive. And I was like, really? Huh. This must be an acute infection. What is my viral load, and what are my CD4s?
Oh yeah, you was in the field.
She was like, who are you?
Yeah.
Nobody asked me those kinds of questions. And so I had to, knowing that my life was not over, knowing that, okay, there are medications out there that are going to keep me alive and healthy. This is really going to change how I operate and who I am. I had to also realize this doesn't define me, but at the same time, because I have this diagnosis, I need to do something even greater than I was doing before in the field of HIV. I didn't know what that was. And a friend of mine told my mother that as well, and she said, "And I'm going to hold you to that," as she had to deal with this news too.
Yeah.
My friend had said, with this diagnosis, I expect that he is going to do something great with this. And my mother said,
Wow.
I'm going to hold you to that. And so HIV, a part of my life, but not defining my life, had to be one of those things that I sort of worked through and got to.
And look at you now. I mean, I guess.
Hello.
I know this was not part of the plan, but I think it has worked out.
Or
where
was
I feel
it?
like it. The White House was
Wasn't probably not your plan.
It was not my plan. Right.
Yeah.
It was not my plan.
Yeah, hello.
Right.
Definitely
There was a greater power that I also had to learn to get out of the greater power's way too.
All right.
Like that
Hello
whole
now.
thing about me being angry, because I was like, this was not what I thought was supposed to happen. And I had to learn, you have to get out of the higher power's way and believe that there is a path and a trajectory.
I want to ask because I feel like I just know so many Black gay men who work in the field, and we never could dream of being in a position that feels as influential as yours. Having had this career and been in this position, what would you say is like the highest point for you, or the most accomplishment that you're the most proud of, and maybe something that you kind of felt like I didn't really get to do what I wanted to do, or that was like a low moment or a powerless moment?
I think my high moment was World AIDS Day 2021, which was President Biden's first World AIDS Day as president. And I had started in June of that year, and the task was President Biden wanted a national HIV/AIDS strategy. President Obama had one. As vice president, he was used to that, sort of to guide the nation and the federal response. And I said, I think we can do this. Wouldn't it be great if we did it for your first World AIDS Day as president? So that only gave me 6 months to coordinate and all of the federal agencies, get community input, get this thing document written, cleared through all of the departments, released, and then a World AIDS Day event. And then after I did that, they were like, well, then now you have to work with the speech writing team to develop President Biden's speech for World AIDS Day. So I was like, oh my God, I'm actually doing
Speech
this.
writer.
Wow. And so working with the speech team, I had President Biden talk about HIV criminal laws and policies, because we have about 30 states that criminalize HIV transmission. I mean, their laws are on the books that criminalize HIV, sometimes not even focusing on transmission.
Wow.
It's a problem. And I wanted President Biden to speak to that problem. And so I didn't care what else he said in the speech or what else the speech writers took out. But President Biden did talk about HIV criminal laws and policy in his World AIDS Day speech. He even went off script and was like, these laws and policies don't even follow the science of HIV transmission.
Wow.
It's 2021. We need to follow the science. Come on, let's get with it. And I was like,
Good talk.
drop the mic. I'm done. He said the thing that I
would be
wanted
my
to
high
say.
point, too.
That was the high point. And then as if that wasn't enough, at an event of the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, I met a guy from Detroit who's been a victim of HIV criminal laws. And he said he saw on YouTube President Biden's speech that day. And he said, and he cried. He said, for the first time, I felt like somebody in Washington saw me and understood what I was going through.
Wow.
So yeah, that would be my high point.
Double high point.
Double
Double
high
high
point.
point.
Like, yes, he did it, he said it, and people saw it and really like got moving behind it.
Yeah.
We still need to address those 30 states where this is a problem and issue.
Yeah.
Luckily, DC has in its statute laws that protect HIV surveillance data from use in criminal prosecution. So really applaud DC as a model for other states and jurisdictions. I think my low point in not, wow, that's a tough one. But I think low points in not being able to get something done. I'm trying to think what that could be. I mean, I'm having some. I would say I'm having some low points in terms of right now where we are with Congress and a lack of understanding of HIV and the needs. Okay. So I think that's the thing that sort of really is bothering me right now. Is the thing that is a struggle. Is that the investment in HIV and the amount of money that we need Congress to be on board, and we've been working to get them on board more, and that's been a struggle.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
I would say that there are a couple of call to actions here. One, we need to continue to have the conversations about HIV within our community to erase the stigma and the discrimination. Two, get an HIV test. Ask for an HIV test if you haven't had an HIV test in the last year. Three, because I did 1 and 2. So 3
Or
is,
F.
or F.
Whatever.
Or F.
Right.
3 would be, if you are HIV negative, find out information about PrEP. It can save, it can extend your life and that of your sexual partners. If you are HIV positive, get into care and stay into care. Live a long, healthy life. I'm planning to live till 90 plus.
Hello. Right.
And so I want all of you all to be there too. But it's possible. Easy, effective, safe treatment is available.
There you have it, folks. Another great episode of Positive Voices. I'm your girl, T. Pearson Hall.
I'm Malachi Stewart.
And we had our wonderful guest with us, Harold here. You was the director of
White House Office of National AIDS Policy.
Big timer. Y'all heard him. He went from combat boots to Oxfords in this journey of EHE, eradicating the HIV epidemic. And we want you to join in with us. So head on over to dcnshiv.org, take a survey, learn some things. If you want to watch more of season 1, or if you want to catch up on what we have going on for season 2, click podcast and you'll be linked to us. We want to hear from you though. When you watch the episodes, we want you to like, share, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, pull up on us so we can hear your thoughts as well. Also, you're like, we might need some services. I might need some resources. I may not know where things are around me and I want to get plugged in. So we want you to head on over to linku, the letter U, as Kai likes to say, .dmv.org. Put in your zip code. Put in your friend's zip code. A list of resources will populate based on your area, and you'll be able to get connected to the folks that can keep you going in your journey of healing in life. Once again, this is Positive Voices Season 2. We'll catch you guys on the next episode.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.